and brought him into the studio. Now, this is almost 10 years ago. So I'm in there doing this talk show, relatively new, and I start popping these cashews during commercial breaks. And the salt hit me all of a sudden, and it was, for a talk show host, one of the most frightening experiences because, you're gagging and you're coughing, and we've got these special cough buttons. You don't have them, obviously, where we push a button and nobody could hear us gagging and coughing. But I made it a rule for myself that the only thing I bring into a studio is a glass of water or tea, and that's it for me. I will not eat anything hours before air because it'll shut your throat down.
Yes. And I was just being greedy. I was just having my breakfast while I was talking to you guys.
Well, you were comfortable. You're doing an international show. You're lying in bed. You've got your breakfast served to you. I can understand that.
So I apologize to all you listeners out there. You had to hear me spluttering on my toast and marmalade. But anyway, I can't even remember where we were. What was the question?
Well, at least we know it's live radio, don't we?
Well, you very nearly, earlier in the show, if you heard a funny clunking noise, it was my cat. Because I was sitting up in bed. It was my cat trying to sit on my shoulder while I was talking to you all. So.
All right, well, we were talking about your Center for Fortean Zoology and what it was exactly.
Well, it's two things. It's an organization, it's a society for studying mystery animals, which anybody can join, and which you can join through the website, which is www.csv.org.uk. But now we're in the process of actually building a permanent centre. Now, for years, as I think I was saying earlier, we were based in a little house in the middle of a suburban housing estate in the city of Exeter. But last year, sadly, at the age of 81, my father died, and I inherited my old family home. And most of the house was built in about 1800. And it's got big stone floors and oak beams and 3 or 4 resident ghosts. But bits of it are even older than that. Bits of it are about 1600.
Yeah.
Bits of it were added on more recently. It's a big rambling house with outbuildings and grounds. And up at the top of the grounds, we've got some outbuildings which we're converting now into a museum, laboratory, and library. So we've now got a proper physical centre as well as having a organisation that's a section of websites. We've now got a physical centre that all members are welcome to come and visit all year round, which is where we keep a collection of exotic animals and our museum exhibits.
You know what? If I ever make it out that way, I've got to come by and see this. I mean,
well, you're welcome. Anytime you're in England, George, you're welcome to. Because my house it's somewhere between an old Victorian English gentleman's naturalists club, and on the other side, or a bit of a sort of 1960s hippie commune. Because an Australian guy came to visit once for a weekend. He stayed 3 months. I mean, this is just what happens,
I love it. Hey, let me ask you before we get into Loch Ness, the mood of the country now that your soldiers, the sailors and Marines, have been released. Of course, they're at the airport. I'll check to see if they're up in the air yet. But that's got to be great news for you, Brits. How does that affect your feelings about Iran as a nation?
To be quite honest, I didn't know this morning. I didn't know so they've been released, have they?
Yeah, as a matter of fact,
Remember, it's 9 o'clock at night for you.
That's right.
First thing in the morning. What's happened?
Well, they are releasing them. They're at the airport in Tehran right now. They may already be up in the air, and they're coming back home. And Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president, the one who has said some very strange, whacked-out things in his career, has basically said that this is a gift to the British people, and you've been good to us, and off they go. So that conflict will be resolved. I'm just wondering what it means for the future, the standoff with the Iranians over their nuclear, capabilities. I wonder if this gesture will keep Britain from getting involved in that. Well,
to be quite honest, I I hope and pray that nothing bad's going to happen. I hope that there isn't going to be another war. Iran is a very beautiful place. I went there years and years and years ago, back in the 1960s when it was still ruled by the Shah.
Yes.
I went to Tehran, and it's one of the most beautiful... Back in 1968, anyway, it was one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to. It was like something out of one of the old Sinbad films from the 1950s. Absolutely beautiful place. And I was at school with some Iranian children, and the people are lovely. It's the politicians that mess everything up.
Yes, they are. I would concur. The Iranian people that I know, specifically in Los Angeles, are heartwarming, lovely, caring people, and I've got to believe most of them in Iran are that way.
I think people are basically good. It's politics that gets in the way.
I think, and greed, Jonathan.
Yeah.
And greed. The politics and the greed, and they begin to manipulate people, and man, the worst. Anyway, let's talk about some fun things. When I was a boy, there were two creatures that captured my imagination. One was what we've talked about, the abominable snowman. I couldn't get enough material on reading about Yeti and those stories. And then the other, of course, was the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. Tell me about the loch itself. What does it look like? And the stories have been around for years.
Oh, there's been stories of strange creatures in the loch for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's a very strange place. It's the biggest area of water in the United Kingdom, biggest area of fresh water in the United Kingdom. It's the deepest lake in the United Kingdom, and it's very long and thin, surrounded by mountains. It's very, very spooky. But there's one thing from a zoological point of view which has to be remembered. It's a deep glacial lake, and there's very little in there. There's very little fish in there. It's got a very poor population of fish because it's so cold, and there's very few nutrients, which is one of the big things that you have to take into consideration when you're talking about the Loch Ness Monster.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where I think some of your listeners might be able to help me, because you can't see the Loch Ness Monster in isolation. It's only one of dozens of lakes all across the Northern Hemisphere where the same sort of things are reported. There's at least 3 in Scotland, there's 3 or 4 in Ireland, a couple in Wales. There are lakes all across North America.
We've got
Canada
one of the Lake Champlain.
Lake Champlain, Lake Okanagan, Lake Winnipegosis. There's lakes all across the Northern Hemisphere. All across northern Russia, northern China, Japan, Korea, all across the Northern Hemisphere, there are lakes where there are monsters reported.
Same creature, unlike the Chupacabra and the possibility of Bigfoot being one of several. Same creature for this?
Yes, you put the nail on the head, the same phenomenon. It's exactly the opposite. All these lakes, I think in the vast majority of them, there are a couple where I think there might be a something different there. But we'll come back to that later. Lake Okanagan in Canada, for example, I think there's something different in. And also a lake called Lake Tianchi, which is on the borders of North Korea and China. I think there is a totally unique creature in there as well. But most of the lakes in the Northern Hemisphere where there are lake monsters reported, I think the explanation's the same. Now, for years, people have been reporting something in Loch Ness, and the popular explanation is that it is something from the age of the dinosaurs. But that doesn't hold water. For one thing, it was frozen solid in the last ice age. For another thing, that all the prehistoric reptiles that lived in the water, the prehistoric marine and freshwater reptiles, they were air breathers. They would have come up to the surface to breathe air. And although there are 2 or 3 reports a year of something enormous in Loch Ness, there are just not enough sightings that there would be if something was coming up to the surface to breed. Also, they would have come onto land to have their babies. And although there has been a handful of land sightings, there's very, very few and far between. Another problem is that in order to keep a viable population, you need at least 14 individual animals. And there just isn't enough biomass in the lake. There just isn't enough, aren't enough fish in there to support a viable population of huge predators. So what on earth can it be? What we believe is that we're talking about a giant eel.
A giant eel. Okay, there's a fellow by the name of Steve Alton believes the same thing.
Yes, very much so. And now this is where it gets exciting. Because what I love about the natural sciences is that despite the popular belief that we know everything about the world, we don't. Now, it's only been in the 1940s, it was only been since the 1940s that we knew how the European eel breeds, how the European eel's biology works. But it was only since last September or October, October 2006, that we knew how the Pacific eels live. Now, there are three main species of eel in the Northern Hemisphere. You've got the North American eel, you've got the European eel, and you've got something called the Japanese eel, which is all across Asia. But they're all very, very, very closely related. Now, all the eels on the Atlantic coast of Europe and the Atlantic coast of North America, we've known since the 1940s that when they reach sexual maturity, the adults swim down to the sea. As soon as they get in salt water, they can't feed. I don't know why they can't feed. No one knows why they can't feed. But they get in the salt water, and they swim down to a place called the Sargasso Sea off the coast of Florida,
right.
which has always amused me. It's actually in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, which I've always found quite funny, where they mate, they spawn, they die, and the eggs hatch into funny little things called leptocephali, which are about the size of your little fingernail, which are the shape of leaves. And up until the 1940s, these were thought to be totally different species of fish. But they swim back up the Atlantic, and as soon as they get into coastal waters, they turn into little baby eels called elvers, and they swim up the rivers again, up to the lakes and rivers where they live until they're sexually mature, and the whole thing starts all over again. Now, it was only found out in the fall of last year that the ones on the Pacific coast, especially the Asian ones, but also the Pacific coast of North America, they do exactly the same thing, except these ones swim down to a place called the Mindanao Trench off the coast of the Philippines. And that was only discovered last year, which I think is exciting, that a fish as well known as the North American eel, we didn't know how it bred until very, very recently.
I always hoped that it was a plesiosaur, Jonathan.
I'm afraid not. But I tell you what, this is quite exciting. But if you can imagine that something causes very occasionally an eel in a big population to become sterile, so it doesn't have the sexual imperative to swim into salt water.
Right.
It stays in fresh water and just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Did you ever hear the theory back in the 30s that...
I'm not that old.
No, you're not that old, but what they saw, when there's that incredible photo of Nessie from 1934 that has this huge neck-shaped thing sticking out of the water, some people theorize that there was an elephant swimming in the loch from one of the nearby circuses because they would go that way all the time. And if you look at the picture, then compare it to an elephant underwater where just his trunk is sticking out and part of his head, it looks almost the same. Is that possible?
I think it's very, very unlikely. It's a lovely story, but I don't think it's true. I think the vast majority of the sightings are giant eels. But if you can imagine, when I was fishing when I was a little boy, I was about 11 or 12, I caught an eel that was about 8 or 10 inches long, and it bit me on the finger. It hurt like nobody's business, and I've still got the scar now, 40 years later, 30 years later, I've still got the scar on my little finger. What I'm wondering, if we're right and there are eels of 15 or 20 foot long, and at any one time there's one or two of them in Loch Ness or Loch Morar or Lake Okanagan or Lake Champlain or these things, that's one hell of a monster.
Oh, it is. There's no doubt about that.
20 foot long. that you don't have to theorize Jurassic Park sort of scenario to have a monster. These are one hell of a monster. They'd be the big alpha predator. And wow, I would love to meet one.
Well, not too close, though.
Well, there's actually been reports of these in some lakes in the north of England, in a place called Lake Windermere. And we're up there next month trying to catch one.
I sure would make a lot of sushi if you're into sushi eel, John.
Oh, gosh, yes. Well, I like sushi, and I'm a big man, so, I can eat quite a lot, but even I'm not going to eat a 20-foot eel.
Well, I've got to tell you that it is a story that continues to perplex and fascinate. Are they still seeing something in the loch now?
Yes, they are. And if you go to our multimedia website, which is www.csvtv.org, if you look on the section which says What's On, there's a number of documentary films that we've made, including one which was made on Lake Windermere last year. And I've given it the dreadful title of Eel or No Eel, because I love bad puns. And that's got some eyewitness testimony of the eels in the English Lake District that only happened last year. So we've got 4 or 5 different sets of witnesses up there, and you can see sort of live eyewitness testimony from them there.
By the way, your 15 British sailors and Marines are now in the air on their way back to England.
Thank goodness for that. That's one international crisis that looks like it's been averted for a while.
Absolutely. And it's about time, isn't it?
Oh, yes. I mean, it's been a very, very frightening situation. And I am sure these poor chaps have been in all our prayers, because not just for their own personal safety, but for what on earth was going to happen if they didn't get released.
Jonathan, when we come back, let's talk about Owlman, okay?
Yes, of course.
This is going to be one of those stories. I love these mysteries. I love these monsters. This is George Norrie, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Yep, and Jonathan Downs is with us, and we're going to take phone calls next hour, but when we come back, it's Owlman time on Coast to Coast AM. Jonathan, Owlman, tell us about this.
Well, Owlman is sort of the English version of your Mothman, except it's been seen over a longer period of time. The first sightings took place, what day is it? What day is it today in America? Are you still on Wednesday? I'm on Thursday.
We're on Thursday morning now.
Okay, we're Thursday morning, but about 9 hours ahead of you. But tomorrow's Good Friday. And on Good Friday, 1976, so 31 years ago tomorrow, the first Owlman sighting took place. There were 2 little girls who were on holiday with their family. And they were on holiday in Cornwall, which is a very beautiful part of the United Kingdom, and a very wild country part of the United Kingdom. They were on holiday in Cornwall, a little village called Mornan Smith, 31 years ago tomorrow. And they were playing in the woods while their mum and dad were setting up a picnic lunch. And they came screaming, running out of the woods, saying that they'd seen a nasty feathered bird man, a humanoid creature covered in feathers, flying in the air above a church tower. And they were so scared that their parents cut short their holiday and took them all the way back to the north of England again. And that was just the first of a whole string of sightings. There was another sighting a couple of months later in Cornwall, but in July 1976. And then through 77, 78, 80, 82, every year or so there were another sighting. So to date, I think there's been over 40 different sightings by over 40 different witnesses in that area. And I collected these sightings together a few years ago, and I put them into a book called The Owlman and Others, which is probably my most popular book. And last year, to mark the 30th anniversary of the sightings, we put out a special 30th anniversary edition, which has got all the original, as well as the story that was in the book. It's got updated, it's got interviews with witnesses, it's got photographs, it's got all the original press cuttings, a lot of stuff in it. But this has been something which has intrigued me over the years. It's a very, very grotesque, very weird story.
You know, as you say, it is similar to our own Mothman stories. In this country, Jonathan, Mothman seemed to appear during and right before severe moments of crises, a collapsed bridge where people died, wars, strange things. How about Owlman?
No, it's strange. No, this is something where the parallel doesn't hold up. It seems I know one of the Owlman witnesses very well. He's a very good friend of mine. And it does seem to be, to me, that the people who witness Owlman, it screws up their minds. It screws up their minds forever. It seems, whereas the Mothman reports in the United States seem to sort of be precursors of tragedies, the most famous one being the collapse of the bridge at Point Pleasant in West Virginia in 1967, wasn't it?
Right, that's right.
Yes, again, it's 40 years ago this year. And other reports seem to presage big, either regional or national crises. It doesn't seem to be like that in the UK, but it does seem to, having an encounter with this creature, does seem to fry people's brains, and it has a definite effect on their mental health forever.
And how would you categorize this case, the Owlman, compared to some of your other cryptozoology creatures?
Oh, yeah, the Owlman is most definitely something paranormal. I don't like using the word paranormal, but because I think it's sort of lazy journalism to call it paranormal, because that just means it just doesn't fit into any recognized scientific terms of reference. It's not an animal. It's something very, very weird. And I think if I had to categorize it, I'd say it's a sort of three-dimensional poltergeist. It's something that comes from within us rather than from outside.
That's fascinating. Now, you've investigated animal mutilations in Mexico. Have you also looked at the possible link between these mutilations and UFO cases?
Yes, on a number of occasions, both in Mexico and in the UK. And one of the most interesting cases I've ever dealt with was in a little village in the Pueblo Desert, which was just underneath Popocatépetl. Now, this was an incident that took place in July 1996, in which, in this little village, there'd been 9 creatures in 3 different farms. 3 different farms were attacked on the same night, and in this one farm that I visited, 2 sheep and a goat had been attacked. And the first person to be called to the scene was a Mexican vet. I mean, can you hear Can you hear this in Mexico? I mean, does your broadcast?
Oh yeah, we get sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, if there's anybody in the area of Puebla who knows a vet called Soledad de la Peña, and I'm sorry my pronunciation's dreadful, but Soledad de la Peña, if you're here listening to this, and I know that you were a fan of Art Bell 10 years ago, so if you are listening to this, can you try and contact me through the radio show, please? But she investigated this. She was called to the farmyard to look at this, and she found that these creatures had been completely drained of blood, but at least one of them was still alive. And there's a very famous piece of footage of her putting a white cotton glove on, making a hand into a fist, and putting it into a hole in the breastbone of one of these sheep, and putting it out. There's no blood on her hands. It is incredibly, incredibly strange. Now, she showed me, and this is why I want to talk to her. She showed me some fascinating video footage that she'd taken of what appeared to be glowing balls of light, which appeared to be solid, some sort of UFO phenomenon, coming out of the crater of Popocatépetl, the active volcano. And that's only a few miles up the road. And this is one incredibly fascinating phenomenon. And she believes that there is a direct link between the UFOs and the animal mutilations, the exsanguination of these creatures. And I remember talking to somebody at the time who had said that these glowing balls of light that were coming out of Popocatépetl's crater, that there had been sightings of these UFOs hovering over the village at the time of the attacks. Now, I need to confirm that, because this is just my Spanish is not very good, and this is something that one of the villagers told me, because I went into the shop in the village to buy a pack of cigarettes, and I was talking to them, but my Spanish is very bad, their English was not good, and so I would like to actually try and confirm this story, because something very, very strange going on.
Oh, no question about it. These, in France, they are releasing its UFO cases now to the public, which I think is pretty aggressive. What about Britain?
In Britain, we've only just got a Freedom of Information Act. We've only had a Freedom of Information Act the last few years. You can get hold of this information, but it's still not taken very seriously by the mainstream. But I tell you what, each year in August, we have our annual convention that we call the Weird Weekend. And again, George, if you happen to be in England any August, you're welcome to come and stay and come and join in.
Well, thank you.
Because we have the cream of the world's researchers coming into this little village in the Devon countryside talking about their particular subjects. It's like a 3-day version of your show, except with more beer. But we always, on the Thursday night before the weekend conference, we always have a cocktail party, and it started off with 8 or 9 people. The last year in my garden was 65 people, and they include some of the world's most famous ufologists, who I'm sure have been on your show. You've had Nick Redfern on your show, haven't you?
Absolutely.
And you've had Larry Warren.
Yes, and we've had Nick Pope.
Well, me and Larry, my fiancé, Larry, me and Nick, and a couple of other people were sitting around at a little table in my garden underneath the trees at about midnight, the night before the Weird Weekend, and particularly Larry and Nick had been drinking margaritas all evening, because we mix a very good margarita here, and they were a little bit worse for wear, and suddenly a flying triangle flew over my garden, only about 100 feet above the garden.
Jonathan, after a few of the margaritas you probably made, it was probably somebody's boomerang.
Then again, no, because my girlfriend was there, and she was stone cold sober, and she'll swear it too.
Well, there's something going on up there. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Just recently, the former governor of Arizona, during that 1997 Phoenix Lights episodes, I don't know if you're familiar with that case,
yes.
Thousands of people witnessed seeing this huge triangular-shaped object. Well, 10 years ago, when he was the governor, he held a news conference and brought out his chief of staff, but had him dressed up as an alien, and kind of made fun of it, tongue-in-cheek, and felt so bad about it over the years. He came out publicly just a few months ago, last week on our show, and admitted that what he saw was indeed a UFO. And he believes it's extraterrestrial.
Good God.
Yeah. And that's pretty dramatic. When an elected official finally steps forward and says, you know what, I'm sorry, I made fun of this, there were reasons I had to do what I did, and he was going through some incredible things during his life 10 years ago. But to come forward now, I think is pretty gutsy.
Yes, so do I. That's very strange, though.
Do you investigate UFO cases specifically?
I have done. When I was younger, I did quite a lot. But I'm getting old now. Well, getting older than I was. And running the CSZ is now such a full-time occupation. These days, I concentrate purely on the animals because we're getting to be such a big organisation now. And at any one time, we're doing research all over the world. And we're trying to publish 20 books a year at the moment as well. So we're running what's quite a large publishing outfit and coordinating research all over the world. Plus I've got a large collection of our own animals here. And I do a lot of work here in the UK as well. I do quite a lot of charity work as well, and I work for the local church as well. So basically I've got so much on my plate, and the UFO research has gone by the wayside, I'm afraid, the last few years.
Remember a couple of weeks ago, scientists said that in Indonesia they discovered more species of animals, species that we'd never even known about before. Would you consider them or call them cryptozoologists as well?
I would, yes. I mean, some people wouldn't. Some people think that cryptozoology is purely about the big, exciting things like lake monsters and man-beasts. But to me, cryptozoology is about the study of unknown animals, whether it be unknown insects that are 2 inches long or an unknown whale that's 40 foot long. Because and I think it's actually an ever more important thing in the world. And this is something which I think a lot of people miss. It's generally agreed these days that if the human race is to survive, we've got to keep the ecology of the planet as safe, as protected as possible. And so all the major countries in the world signed up to a big agreement on biodiversity about 15 years ago. And cryptozoology is the one branch of science which is looking at expanding our knowledge of the world's biodiversity. I think that the only way we are going to understand our environment anywhere in the world, and it's imperative that we do understand our environment if we're going to survive as a species, is if we understand the complex relationship of all the different species that live there. And so I think that what we're doing isn't just pushing back the frontiers of human knowledge. I think in a very real way what we're doing is of paramount importance if the human race is going to survive.
What creature of all of them you've investigated would you like to find?
Oh.
Just one. You can only have one.
I can only have one, and you're probably going to laugh at this, because most of them, all the other stuff I've been talking about on the show so far today, they've been quite big, exciting things. But the one thing that fascinates me, there's a little island in the South Atlantic called St. Helena, which not more than 1 in 10 people's ever heard of. I mean, not more than 1 in 10 people in Britain's ever heard of, and it's been British for the last 200 years. It's a little island. You know where Ascension Island is?
Yeah.
It's about 800 miles south of Ascension Island. Back in 1815, when Britain finally defeated the Emperor Napoleon, we captured him for the second time and realized we had to put him somewhere so he wouldn't cause any more trouble. So we annexed this little island of St. Helena up in the middle of nowhere in the South Atlantic. We also annexed Ascension Island to the north and a place called Tristan da Cunha to the south. And all three still belong to the British now, 200 years later. And St. Helena is the island where Napoleon died. But on this, there's something strange about island wildlife, island faunas. We talked earlier about Puerto Rico, and how on Puerto Rico there were strange rodents like this odd porcupine that I think is the truth behind the Chupacabra. And on Madagascar, you've got 98% of the world's lemurs live there. And on Puerto Rico, the insects grew incredibly large. And not on Puerto Rico, on St. Helena, and until very recently, there was the world's largest earwig, which was 5 or 6 inches long. And I want to go back. That's the thing I want to do. I want to go back there. Most of all, I want to go back there and see if I can rediscover it. Because I want to discover the world's largest earwig. Because I think that's a really, really cool, groovy thing to do.
Do you believe in mermaids? What do you think they were?
Again, Mother Nature is very strange. If you look across the world, you've got the concept of parallel evolution. For example, in Australia, where the placental mammals never really took off, there were placental mammals, they died out. The marsupials adapted to fill every single ecological niche. And you had, until very recently, and it's probably still there, an animal called the marsupial wolf, the Tasmanian wolf, which looked exactly the same as a wolf or a large dog or coyote in the rest of the world. And evolution fills these gaps. And if you look at the North Atlantic and the South Pacific, if you look at the Antarctica and the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle, you've got very, very close parallels between animals that live there. And for example, in the Antarctic, you have got elephant seals, and in the Arctic, you've got walruses, both very, very large, slow-moving pinnipeds. Now, in the Antarctic, you've got an animal called the leopard seal, which is particularly particularly fast, and unlike most other seals. There isn't a known version of that living in the Arctic, but I think that the animals that have been reported by many people for hundreds of years in the Arctic Circle, at least the ones that the explorer George Steller saw and described as a sea monkey, I think that they are a rare and so far undiscovered species of seal that has flippers that look like arms and has a ape-like head that lives up in the Arctic Circle.
Wow, I got to tell you, it's fascinating. I envy what you do. When you were a little boy, did you always have this interest in creatures?
Well, I was brought up in Hong Kong, which at that time was a British colony. And I know these days, you say Hong Kong to anyone, they think it's a big concrete jungle, the most urbanized place on earth. But even today, Hong Kong's got some amazing wild places. And so I was brought up amongst a dazzling array of weird creatures. There were killer sharks and giant lizards and monkeys and all sorts of things, and porcupines and pangolins. And I saw all these things as a kid. And I was fascinated by animals, but one day when I was 7 years old, my mother went and got me a library book, and it was called Myth or Monster. And it was one of the three great epiphanies of my life. I read this book, and I realized that people were interested in things, that people believed that things like the Loch Ness Monster, or sea serpents, or the Yeti, or Bigfoot. And it was one of the three great epiphanies of my life. I went to school the next day, and I said, Miss, I'm going to become a monster hunter when I grow up. And she said, young man, if you don't know your 9 times table, you will never become anything, let alone a monster hunter. Well, 40 years on, I'm a professional monster hunter, so that shows teachers don't always know what they're doing.
We're going to take calls next hour, Jonathan. People, you can relate your stories with us, your creature stories, and Jonathan wants information, which he'll tell you about next hour, because those of you in Mexico and other regions of this planet, Puerto Rico, you might be able to help him out. I'm George Norrie. Back in a moment with your phone calls with our special guest cryptozoologist, Jonathan Downs, on Coast to Coast AM. It's creature time. Next up, Jonathan Downs and your questions, your comments, your stories on Coast to Coast AM. And Jonathan, specifically on our international line, calls from Puerto Rico or Mexico. What are you looking for there?
Well, there's a couple of things. I'm trying to get in contact with, in Mexico, with the vet, Soledad de Pena, because I interviewed her about 10 years ago, and I'd like to talk to her in more depth about the links between the animal mutilations that took place in 1996 in the Puebla district and UFOs. But I'm also looking for, if there's anybody who's listening who lives anywhere near Cholula in Mexico, I've got a job for you, especially if you've got a digital camera. So if you'd like to phone in, if there's somebody in the Cholula district, I've got a little bit of detective work I want you to do for me. As far as Puerto Rico is concerned, I'm trying to contact any of the farmers who are in the Canovanas district, in the flat grasslands above the town of Canovanas. And also, if there are any young people in Puerto Rico who are interested in natural sciences, interested in natural history, who don't mind going up into the El Yunque forest for me, I've got a little job for you as well. So please phone in for me. Also, basically, anybody who's listening who's interested in mystery animals or interested in the natural world and wants to get involved, I've probably got something you can do wherever you are in North America. So just phone in, let's have a chat.
All right, let's go back to the phones now. First-time caller line, you're on the air with us, and where are you calling from?
I'm in a truck, George and Jonathan. I'm in Illinois.
Great. Well, hello,
earlier
sir.
on, when you were talking about Loch Ness Monster and several other lakes across the northern hemisphere, you made an exception for a couple of lakes, one of which I believe you said was on the Korean and Chinese border, which were interesting cases and dissimilar, but then you never elaborated on them.
No, you're quite right. There's the two lakes. One, Lake Tianchi on the Korean-Chinese border, and the other is Lake Okanagan in British Columbia in Canada. Those are two lakes where the descriptions of the animals are so specific. I don't think that my giant eel theory can explain what's in there. In neither lake, I mean, in both lakes, people have claimed that there is a giant prehistoric reptile there, and I really don't think, for the reasons I gave earlier, that theory holds water. But in both lakes, I think there's a indigenous unknown species of large animal there. If I had to place a bet in it, I would say the lake in Lake Tianchi on the North Korean Chinese border, what I think's in there is probably a giant turtle. For example, in a lake called Heavenly Lake in the middle of in the middle of Saigon in Vietnam, they have now discovered an enormous species of turtle that's actually sacred to the local people. For many years it was thought to be a myth, but now they photographed it, never caught it, but it's absolutely enormous in that lake. And I think we're talking about something even bigger. In Lake Tianchi, I think you might be having a turtle that's 18 or even 20 feet long, a very, very rare, very, very old specimen. And in Lake Okanagan in Canada, I think what we're talking about is a very specialized sort of freshwater seal. But those are the two main lakes in the world where I think the local monster is not explainable by my theory about the giant eels.
Okay, thank you. Let's go west of the Rockies. You're up with us on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hi, great show, George. My question has to do with the possibility of very large sharks, perhaps great white sharks in the deep ocean. As recently as the Pleistocene, you had Megalodon, which was up to 50 or 60 feet long, based upon its tooth size. Could there be very large great white sharks down there? And also the status of the so-called dinosaur in the Congo. Has there anything recently come out on that? I'll hang up and listen to your answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, my answer to both of those, yes, there's something in both of them. There's no doubt whatsoever that there are some extremely big sharks in the ocean, and I'm convinced that there are several new species awaiting discovery. There are a number of reasons why Carcharodon megalodon, the giant great white shark, is probably not still around. Because it wasn't a deep water fish, it was a shallow water fish. And I think that a predator of that size in coastal waters would probably have been found by now. But there's a lot of evidence to suggest that there are some giant sharks, probably related to the Greenland shark, which are found still awaiting discovery in freshwater, in deep waters. You've got to remember that the megamouth shark, which is one of the largest sharks known to science, was only discovered in 1976, and only discovered by accident. So I'm sure that there are more sharks to be discovered. As far as the Mokele mbembe, the creature of Lake Tele in the Congo, is concerned, now this is where Richard, my colleague in the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and I disagree. He believes it's a type of heavily specialized aquatic lizard, probably a monitor lizard that's 20 or 30 foot long. There were, within very recent historical times, there were giant monitor lizards. The longest known to science now is 16 foot long. It's the Salvatore dragon, which is found in New Guinea. The largest lizard known to mankind at the moment is the Komodo dragon. But that's heavier and bulkier, but longer is the Salvatore dragon, which can go up to 14, 15, 16 foot long. And so there's not much of a paradigm shift from that to imagine in another rainforest in the Congo a 20 or 25 foot lizard. However, I once again am wondering if it is actually a giant soft-shelled turtle, because as anybody who lives near the Everglades or any of the swamps in southern Georgia will know, you can get some bloody enormous soft-shelled turtles there that have got shells up to 5-6 foot long. And anybody who's ever seen a soft shell basking with its long neck out in the sun can imagine what the appearance of a soft-shelled turtle would be 2 or 3 times that size. So that's what I think the answer to that one is.
Good point. Jonathan in Mongolia, the death worm. What is that creature?
Now, that's another thing where the stories that came to the West are very much exaggerated. So if you believe the stories that come to the West, this is a creature that's 3 or 4 foot long, which lives most of the time under the sand, but when it comes out, it can kill by electric shocks or by spitting venom. And it's supposed to be deadly to the touch. When you actually get out there and speak to the nomads in the Gobi Desert, as we did in 2005, and again, if you look on the CSZ TV website, there's a full-length documentary that's called Lair of the Red Worm, which tells the story of our expedition out there. The local people believe that it's a poisonous reptile, either a type of specialized worm lizard or a snake, that at least during the breeding season is bright red. But the stories of, and it lives underground most of the time, and it comes out in June or July in very hot weather, but all the stories with spitting acid and killing by electric shocks are really apocryphal. They're just things that travelers' tales that have been exaggerated when they got to the west.
All right, let's go to our west of the Rockies line. You're on Coast to Coast with us. Hi there.
Hello.
Yeah.
My name is Susan, and I'm from northern Arizona. And, well, it was kind of strange because at one time I was walking with my guide dog, and there was an animal, and it came up behind us and chased us. And it sounded, I could hear it walking, but it didn't sound, it wasn't quiet, and it kind of sounded between a bark, but kind of a howling at the same time. And my guide dog kind of wanted to go after it because it kind of ran at us at one time. And I don't know what it was, if it was a bobcat or a fox. But I put bells on her because I've gotten so many animals that would come out during the time, and we almost got sprayed by a skunk once.
Well, that of course, is not a good thing.
No. But, and I emailed you, Jonathan, a long time ago.
Yeah, I was just going to say hi, Susan. We're old friends, aren't we? We've known each other for a long time.
Yeah. Well,
how are you?
I could email you again because I've got a whole. I actually now though I put those jingle bells on her, so I haven't run into any skunks. But I hear a lot of animals as I'm going through the trail. A lot of different birds and just little scutterings on the side of the trail. As they run along.
Yes, I remember you and I had swapped a lot of emails a few years ago.
Yeah.
Then I changed my computers and moved house, and then we sort of lost contact.
Yeah, and I didn't know you changed computers. I just thought you'd gotten tired of hearing about all those stories.
No. What happened was about 2 years ago, my father was taken very ill.
Yeah.
And so I had to move house to go look after my father until he died. And so I changed computers, and I lost everybody's email address, including yours. So I'm very sorry I haven't been contacting you, Susan.
Well,
but it's interesting what you say, because back at the end of 2004, as George was talking about earlier, there were the sightings in Texas and Arizona of strange, bald, blue dogs that looked a bit like coyotes, but people thought were Chupacabra. You know about those, don't you, George?
Yes.
Oh, no, this was in northern Arizona, but it sure did seem kind of different. And I know some people told me that they saw one around the college, and they couldn't figure out. Someone would say, oh, it's a fox, no, it's a coyote, and nobody really knew what it was. And I could actually hear it walking along, but my dog sure didn't like it. When it took out after us, it kind of ran at us, and then came around the front and ran at us. And she went, roar, roar, and started. I had to hold on to her harness. She wanted to go for it.
Now, what I actually think, because I was the only European investigator and one of the only scientists at all who got called in after one of those creatures was shot in Elmendorf in Texas. And I was there at the end of 2004, and I examined the bones. I examined the skeleton of the creature that had been shot, and I compared it with other coyote skulls. And what I actually think we've got, first of all, let me lay this one to rest, it's got absolutely nothing to do with the Chupacabra at all. But what I think we've got is an amazing case of Mother Nature in action, because people talk about evolution, and whether or not you accept that the currently held view of evolution is correct, it's broadly correct. Animals do evolve from one thing to another. I think, but people forget that this is something which is still happening. And what I think that these blue dogs in Texas Arizona are. And I think it's very likely that your coyote that doesn't sound like a coyote, it sounds strangely different, might be one of these. I think we're seeing evolution in action. We're seeing the beginning of a new species. And I think that these strange blue bald dogs are the very, very beginnings of a new species mutating out of the coyote population to form something completely new.
Okay, let's go to our international line, see where they're calling from. Hi there.
It's Jeff from Toronto, Canada.
Okay, Jeff, go ahead, please.
And just like to ask Jonathan his opinion on the recent story that you've had about the disappearing bees.
Are you aware of this story, Jonathan? Okay. Honeybees across the United States are disappearing by the millions.
Good Lord.
By the millions, and it could be a disaster for all of us.
Well, the same thing happened in England in about 1860, and the food and the honey industry in the south of England crashed and burned in about 1868 and 70. And a lot of people at the time were very, very frightened, very worried, because honey was an enormous industry in Britain then. It just so happened, though, that living in a big house in the middle of the area where the honeybees used to live, and I didn't, was a very famous scientist, Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin did an investigation into it, and after about 3 weeks, he sent a message to the head of the beekeeping industry to come and see him. And the head beekeeper came in and said, well, have you found out what had caused it? And Darwin said, yes. He said, well, was there anything we can do about it? He said, yes, there is. Keep more cats. And he said, what? He didn't understand why. But it turned out that there's actually been a population explosion in the population of a type of field mouse. And these field mice were getting into the beehives, and they were eating the grubs. They were eating the juvenile bees. Even more so that they were eating the roots of clover plants, which the bees were feeding off. And because of the population explosion of the mice, the knock-on effect was that the bees have all but disappeared. So the answer that Darwin came up with, keep more cats, it'll kill the mice and lessen the population pressure on the bees. It could well be something like that, but to be quite honest, I haven't actually looked into it, so I don't know. This is the first I've heard of it, but it is an interesting historical parallel.
Let's go to our wild card line. You're on with Jonathan Downs on Coast to Coast.
Hello. I had a question. When I was a little kid, I lived up in Oregon, and I ran into this giant mosquito-like creature. And
how big was it?
It was about the size of a man's chest. I mean, the head of it was the size of a man's chest.
My God, did it look like a mosquito?
Yes, it did. This thing was monstrous, and it was about maybe 6-7 feet away from me, and I know this because I shot it with a BB gun. And I was just curious if he's heard of anyone that has ever come across something like this. And I'll take my answer over the phone.
All right, on your radio. I understand. Go ahead.
Wow, I've never heard of anything like that before. But I'll tell you what, caller, if you want to email me, and my email address is Jon, Jon, @eclipse.co.uk. I'd be really interested in hearing more about that. And if anybody else from that part of Oregon has ever heard of something like this, please email me, because this sort of thing interests me.
Just what we need, Jonathan, chest-sized mosquitoes flying around.
My gut feeling is that they're going to turn out to be something else. I can't imagine.
I mean, can you imagine?
There are reasons why insects can't grow that big.
By the way, I believe everything on this planet has a purpose, right?
Yep.
What's the purpose of the mosquito?
I'm not a theologian. I have no idea. I believe everything on the planet's got a purpose. But then again, I also believe that the universe is too large and complex and magnificent and mysterious for us to understand all about it. So I'm sure there is a purpose, but I have no idea what about it.
You know what? It's probably population control.
Yes, or divine providence, I don't know. Don't ask me. I think this is one of the things you can only find out from your maker, not from me.
What was the website again? It's a little slower for us. For your and your email.
My email, sorry, John, Jon, at Eclipse, ECLIPSE.co.uk.
.co.uk.
.co.uk.
Very good. And Jonathan's websites are linked up at coasttocoastam.com, so you can go there and take a look at some of the many things that he does, including, of course, he's the biggest cryptozoologist publisher in the world. That's big stuff. When we come back, we'll take final phone calls right here on Coast to Coast AM. Well, our next Coast to Coast program, The Prophecies of Father Andrew Wingate. Make sure you're part of that program. He's talking about end times on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast, our final segment now with Jonathan Downs. We'll take your questions. Wildcard line, it's your turn. Hi there.
Hello, George. This is John from Long Island, New York.
Hey, John. Thanks for calling.
Okay, I just want to comment quickly on cattle mutilations. Wasn't most of them debunked because it was actually bugs, not just maggots, but different types of bugs that makes it look like surgical precision.
Not most of them, but some of them were. That's true.
Yeah, and with the warmer the climate, there's going to be more bugs. So it's going to make it look like that quicker overnight. It doesn't take that many hours to do that.
Well, that was you, I take it, right?
Yeah, that was me. That was actually.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right. You've heard of bugs and animals doing this, Jonathan?
Yes, I have. The species, particularly a type of beetle called the sexton beetle, which will enter the corpse of a recently dead animal through the different orifices, and it will actually. That's actually one of the things which has been used to explain the idea of the anus of some of these creatures having been cored. But although these bugs and beetles do explain some of them, like you said, they don't explain all of them. And there are some of the... I've investigated several animal mutilation cases that really are... one in particular, which was completely inexplicable. Most of the ones I've done... Sadly, most of the ones I've investigated, it's perfectly clear what animal caused them, and it was man. Most of the ones I've investigated have actually been the work of sick and twisted human beings. But there's one in particular on a horse which was attacked a couple of years ago in the West Country, South Devon in England. The attacks on that are particularly strange, and I'm not sure what caused them.
All right, John, thanks. East of the Rockies, your turn. You're up with us on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, in 1957, I'm Robert from 610 WIOD Miami.
Yes, sir.
In 1957, my mother was taking me to work over at Miami International Airport. I had just gotten out of the military service. I was 19 at the time. There was what appeared to me to be a pre-delusional lizard. He had a sail like a sailfish, and he was sunning himself on a concrete slab. He was stood about a foot off of the ground. He was 10 foot long, and he ran directly between my legs at about 15 miles an hour. I folded his sail down about halfway and grabbed it, and it split his sail. It never slowed him down. He kept right on going, and he ran 50 yards and hit a canal. And I stayed around about 10 minutes looking for him. I figured maybe he'd drowned. I didn't know, but I had to get to work anyway, and I left that. And if he wants to find a 60-foot squid, there's one he feeds at the north end of Lake Worth.
60-foot squid.
Yeah.
It's one of the giants.
He feeds at the north end of Lake Worth at a dam. He backs a bunch of mullet up there, schools of mullet up to the dam, and he feeds there.
Jonathan, you want to hop out there one day and see one of those?
Oh, yeah. This is going to be a very, very interesting year for me anyway, because I'm doing quite a lot of traveling. I'm going to be doing stuff all over the world. And in July, I'm getting married, so it's going to be one heck of a year for me. But I'm very interested in these stories. Thank you very much.
A 60-foot squid is a pretty good-sized squid, isn't it?
Yeah, but is the caller still there? Are you still there?
Yeah, he's still here, sure.
This would be in fresh water.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, salt water.
Salt water.
It's at the north end of Lake Worth. There's a dam there. And it's right on US 1. Basically, it's no more than a mile away from US 1. The water's probably about 15 feet deep.
15?
15 feet deep.
Golly.
That's all the deeper the water is.
Whereabouts is this again? Which part of the country?
Florida. Lake Worth, Florida.
Yes,
at the north.
There's been reports of both giant squid and giant octopuses from that part of the world a lot. And it's very interesting to me, at least, that the giant squid is one of the largest creatures known on the planet.
Have these creatures in the old days, did they capture ships and pull them down?
Possibly, but that's more likely to be an octopus. But the thing is about the giant squid is it's one of the largest creatures known on the planet. And we've known of its existence since the mid-19th century. But it was only last year that the first film of a living one was ever released. So, it's an example of how little we know about the world around us.
What do you think the biggest octopus might be?
There is a creature known as the Lusca, which is supposed to live in deep water holes off the Bahamas, off Bermuda, and off Florida. And people have suggested that could be 60 foot across.
That could take down a ship.
And that could be an octopus. And I don't know about you, but that'd be one hell of an octopus.
First time caller line, your turn on Coast to Coast. Good morning.
Hi, George.
Uh-huh.
Hi, I actually had two things. I actually had a encounter with a Sasquatch one time. I'm in Kansas City.
Okay.
And I was at a local reservoir one night with my girlfriend, and I heard a whoop owl. And it led me to believe that they actually congregate towards the waterways, going all the way down through Oklahoma and Texas, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And I wanted to ask your guest what he thought about that. And the second point I wanted to ask about was the possibility of the Cadborosaurus. I don't know if you saw it on TV. They had like an old photograph. And I'll just take my response off the air.
All right. Take it away, Jonathan.
I just had a glitch on the phone line. What was the photograph? Tell me about that photograph again.
Well, it was of supposedly a fish of some kind that was found in the belly of a whale. And the carcass had apparently been lost, but it's been on TV on like National Geographic numerous times and stuff like that.
Oh, is this the one from the 1930s from Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah, now that's very strange because there's a well-known scientist, Paul LeBlanc, from one of the Canadian universities, and he together with a guy called Ed Boosfield about 10 years ago described a new species of marine reptile from these photographs. And I think they are very, very interesting. I'd love to know what it is. If Paul LeBon's right, it is a new species of marine reptile, which is actually the creature behind most of the sightings of the sea serpents in that area. And I think it's a very, very interesting picture, but I'm waiting for another specimen to turn up. But I think it's very, very interesting. I think it does show a real creature, but what it is, I don't know. The Sasquatch reports, well, I'm fascinated by them. I think the idea that they follow waterways is very, very real. I think it's a very, very sensible idea. So, again, I'm just waiting to hear more information. But if the caller, because I was with an account of his sighting, I'd be very, very interested to put it on file.
All right, let's go to our wild card line. Good morning. You're on Coast to Coast with us.
Hi, George.
Hey.
I wanted to ask your guest about a species of thought to be previously extinct fish that was caught off the coast of Florida, I believe a year or two ago, and it was in the fossil record. I've seen a number of different textbooks called a coelacanth, and it's believed to have been extinct for over 100 million years. And all of a sudden it's alive in the ocean, totally unchanged from that which was seen in the fossil record.
Now,
they actually caught the fish alive.
Coelacanths are very strange creatures. They're lobe-finned fish, and they're one of the more primitive species of bony fish. They were thought to have been extinct for over 65 million years, and it was actually the 1930s off South Africa that the first specimen was caught. And then it took another 15, 20 years before any more were caught, and they were found in a totally different part of the Indian Ocean. Now, about 8 years ago, totally out of the blue, they were found in Indonesia as well, a completely different species of them. So there are now 2, maybe 3 different species known of coelacanths in the world. I hadn't heard that one was caught off Florida, but there have been reports that there may well be some in the Gulf of Mexico, so this doesn't surprise me. I think they are very obscure, they're deep water fish, but it wouldn't surprise me if populations were found elsewhere in the world as well, because there's some evidence that there's some off the Azores in the mid-Atlantic, and there's been speculation for some years that they'd be found in the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, one point is that, since they haven't changed in that length of time, it kind of blows a hole in the theory of evolution.
Well, not really, because things only change when there's any need for them to change. Spiders haven't changed for even longer. The theory of evolution is that animals will evolve to meet the changing needs of their environment. And the deep oceans where the coelacanths live haven't changed in 100 million years, so there's no need for them to change. Same as spiders are pretty well unchanged from even further back. It's only the creatures that live in changing environments that need to evolve to fit the needs of the new environments, which is one of the reasons we see some of the things which are being reported today, I think, are animals which are evolving rapidly to meet the changing needs of the environment, which mankind is screwing up. Because mankind is really messing up the environment and changing it through global warming and pollution. And I believe that some of the things, like these blue dogs in Texas and Arizona, are actually evolving to be able to fit in with the needs of an environment which mankind has changed irreparably.
Jonathan, I've always wondered why on this planet there are so many creatures, and they're similar, but they're all different. Similar as ears, nose, mouth, eyes, but different because they do look strange. Why does this planet have so many different life forms?
Because we've got an infinitely diverse range of ecosystems on the planet. And don't get me wrong, I believe in the intelligent design of the universe. I don't believe everything happens by chance. I believe that evolution is the mechanism by which it happens, but I believe there is a unifying intelligence behind the universe. But the world has such a multifarious multitude of different ecosystems and different habitats that things can live in, that a infinite number of animals have grown up to live in those habitats.
All right, let's take a few more calls, and then that's it for the night east of the Rockies. Good morning.
Hi, George. This is Bob from Chicago.
Hey, Bob. Sure.
Jonathan, my question is, with all the sightings of Bigfoot by the experts, why hasn't anyone shot Bigfoot with a tranquilizing gun? I've heard stories where they've seen Bigfoot bent over, and it just seems odd to me that if they actually saw this creature, they would carry a tranquilizing gun with them and just shoot him in the rear end, knock him out. But you never hear anything about that.
No, well, I don't know what the law is in America, but I know the law in Britain and Europe for tranquilizing guns, and they are very, very difficult to get hold of. You need to have in England at least, you need to have a police officer and a qualified vet. And also, there's a friend of mine who's actually qualified to use one of these things, and he was trained in the army as a army sharpshooter. And apparently, tranquilizer guns are incredibly difficult to fire. They're much more difficult to hit the target than it is with a bullet. And so if it's as difficult to get hold of the damn things in America as it is in Europe, I think the fact that it's not actually surprising at all that tranquilizing guns haven't been used to catch Bigfoot, because very few people have got them and they're difficult to use. Also, Bigfoot's very rare.
Okay, because the last story I heard, we had one expert that saw him bent over, and then he looked up, and Bigfoot just took off. But it seems to be very strange that this hasn't happened.
Well, the thing that I think is even stranger is that nobody's hit it with a truck. Because I think that the best chance ever of securing a specimen of Bigfoot is going to be totally by accident. It'll be a roadkill.
Are you familiar with the case years ago of someone who claims to have had a Bigfoot in ice, and he took him around to carnivals and events like that?
Yes, I know that one. The problem is with that he changed his story 3 different times. First of all, it was supposed to have been one that was found frozen in ice floating in the Sea of Japan. Second of all, it was supposed to have been a Bigfoot that his father had actually shot somewhere in Oregon. And the third story is that it was one that had been shot in Vietnam and smuggled back in a soldier's body bag. The trouble is that this thing had been touted around carnivals in a block of ice for years upon years upon years. But as soon as somebody came close to getting a court order, so they'd have to go and examine it, the thing disappeared. I can't remember the name of the guy, Frank something. But a friend of mine interviewed him, and allegedly, off the record, he admitted the thing was a big rubber model. But I don't know. This is allegedly off the record. So,
another myth.
What you hear, it's all hearsay.
Let's take a final quick call. You're on the air, west of the Rockies.
Hi, this is Elliot in Lake Elsinore.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask your guest a quick question about the Crpto that basically got me interested in cryptos. It was the beast that went on a murderous rampage in France a couple hundred years ago, Le Bête de Gévaudan. And I was wondering what he thought that creature might have been.
That's always been a case that's fascinated the heck out of me. I think it's a very, very interesting case. And a few years ago, somebody actually made a movie of it, which is really rather good as well. But about 10 years ago, in one of the archives in Paris, they found the skin of a very large hyena. My best guess is somebody had brought a hyena back from Africa, and for some reason it has either escaped or they'd let it go. But again, we get back to the thing that I've been talking about on and off all day, that I don't think, with a lot of things like the Beast of Gévaudan, I don't know if there's one single answer. I think that somebody did have a hyena there, and a spotted hyena. They've shot it, and that was the corpse that was found. But it would also not surprise me if there'd been predations by wild wolves on the children of the area. It also wouldn't surprise me if there had been some horrific attacks by the most vicious predator of all, mankind.
Jonathan, my friend, thank you so much for being on the program. Jonathan Downs, you are welcome. For Steve Carr, Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladesseur, Ross Mitchell, Alan Corbett, Stephanie Smith, Ian Punnett, and Art Bell. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM, and we'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe.